hello. This is my 11th lesson in a lecture series on how the United States is starting a new Cold War with Russia. And today we're going to focus on how the USA is playing get you again game with nuclear weapons to fuel a new Cold War with Russia. Essentially, the United States is jamming Russia with a threat, just like they jammed Russia with a threat back in 2008, threatening to bring both Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. Right. And we're going to focus primarily on the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty today. Right. We're really going to split this up into two lectures. All right, so the USA unilaterally abrogated the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty for bogus reasons, and then installed anti-ballistic missiles in Poland and Romania. Well, they're still working on Poland, but these missiles here in Romania are already complete and ready to go. And this threatened Russia. Russia responded to this threat by deploying some intermediate-range nuclear missiles, abrogating the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. We then pointed the finger at Russia, accusing them of aggression because of this, right? We then announced development of our own intermediate nuclear force missiles, which fuels an arms race, right? So, again, threatening Russia, jamming them with a threat was a get you, the first get you. When they reacted to that threat, right, we get them again. Say, oh, look at, see, they're being aggressive, right? And this kind of, depicts how Americans perceive this. Here's a cartoonist, right? Who was news media, right? So this guy, Dave Granlund, I say here, strategic analysis by a simpleton idiot cartoonist, right? So he's got this scary Russian bear, big and bad scary Russian bear, right? And you got little Uncle Sam here, cowering and all threatened and like, what the hell is going on here? What did I do? And then the bear says, "You scratch my back, comrade, and I'll scratch yours." Right? And then on his arm it says missile deployment. Right? The INF missiles. All right. So I'll show you how this is total bullshit. U.S. is jamming this. U.S. is instigating this. Right? Russia's on its heels reacting again. Right? Trying to scramble, threaten. So to understand this, you must first understand the reasoning behind the ABM Treaty, which eliminated all but one battery of defensive anti-ballistic missiles from both the USA and the USSR. But to understand this, you must further understand, 1, the fundamental differences between nuclear weapons and conventional forces, 2, how nuclear balance and thus nuclear stability is based upon assessments of probability, and the principle of mutually assured destruction. Hopefully this will become clear as I go through this. The meaning of the terms first strike capability and survivability of retaliatory strike capability. You must understand how the USA's justification for unilateral abrogation of the ABM Treaty is complete bullshit, namely the bogus threat of Iranian ballistic missiles. How the USA placement of ABM missiles in Romania and Poland were really directed against Russia and really jammed Russia with a threat. How Russia repeatedly warned that they would deploy INF missiles if the USA abrogated the ABM Treaty and installed anti-ballistic missiles. So today I'm going to focus on these first three things here. With tomorrow's lecture, next lecture, I'll focus on these. Right, so we'll split this in half. All right, so before I go on, I want to give you some just general background information of my overall opinion on nuclear weapons. I believe a nuclear exchange between great powers is super remote, right? I mean, it's like, I don't even think about it. It's like super unlikely. And 2, nuclear weapons are actually stabilizing in that they discourage large-scale conventional war between nuclear nations due to the unpredictable risk of escalation to a nuclear exchange. For example, winning a full-scale conventional war will require massive strategic destruction to one or both nations, pushing backs against a wall, which increases the risk that nations resort to nuclear weapons. Right? 3, the risk of nuclear escalation is minimal for small-scale conflict, especially incidental engagements and or few casualties. And I give an example here. During the Vietnam War, the Soviets provided technical advisors at North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile sites, which were shooting down American planes and killing American boys. Right, and the Johnson administration made these SAM sites off limits for the U.S. Air Force. Right, I mean that was total bullshit as far as I'm concerned. Right, these guys are shooting down American boys. This is a big analysis. I'm not going to get into this. Right. I'm going to skip this for now. All right. So the 1972 ABM Treaty, anti-ballistic missiles. All right. The ABM Treaty, signed in 72 and then amended in 74, allowed the U.S. and USSR each to have only one battery of anti-ballistic missiles because they were seen as being destabilizing, increasing the threat of nuclear war. I expect many to have difficulty understanding how defensive weapons could be destabilizing, but it has to do with the unique nature of nuclear forces. Unlike a large-scale conventional offensive, which requires highly visible mobilization that takes months, I mean up to 6 months to mobilize these forces, and you can't hide it, especially with satellites. All right, a nuclear first strike, on the other hand, can be launched without warning, completely hidden, and with a push of a button. So some guy in some room pushes a button, right? No one can see him, right? And then you know these missiles are launched without warning, out of silos, hidden, right? This places a premium on assessments of probability, specifically estimating your adversary's calculated probability of successfully striking first without being hit in return. And that's first strike capability. First strike capability is the ability to launch a nuclear attack on your adversary and destroy all their capability of hitting you back with a retaliatory nuclear strike. If destruction of a retaliatory strike cannot be assured, then the probability of a first strike is reduced because your own destruction is assured. Right? In essence, there's no point in launching a first strike when you're going to get destroyed as well. Right? And that's the reasoning behind mutually assured destruction, right? Which maintains stability. If we're both assured of being destroyed, well, no one's going to fire. Thusly, belief in first strike capability is destabilizing. If you think you can get the jump on your enemy and get away with it, that's destabilizing. While belief that your adversary retains retaliatory strike capability is stabilizing. Thus, survivability of retaliatory strike capability is stabilizing. Right? I know it's a lot of words. I hope it makes sense. First strike capability can be attained in 2 ways. Remember, this is destabilizing. 1, destroy your adversary's retaliatory strike capability in the first strike before it's launched. So you fire off your missiles first. They go in. They destroy. They destroy all your enemies' missiles before they can get it off. Or 2, destroy your adversary's retaliatory strike capability after it's launched by shooting down any ICBMs that happen to survive your first strike with anti-ballistic missiles or some sort of space-based laser. Right, this was like the Reagan was trying to push this strategic defense initiative during the 1980s. Right, space-based because there's no refraction problems. Yeah. The logic of the ABM Treaty, right? So I'll try to explain this, right? Now, it is near impossible to have 100% confidence that ABMs can completely defend against a first strike because of a number of reasons. First, during the height of the Cold War, the USA and USSR each had upwards, a little shy of 10,000 nuclear warheads each, right? That's hard to get them all. A first strike is launched without warning, unseen, and in an instant, and thus with the element of surprise, causing defenders to be reactive, panicked, confused, uncertain, hesitant, making areas. That's called the fog of war, right? 3, ICBMs travel fast, right? 15,000 miles per hour. That's Mach 20, right? So they're hard to hit. And they take less than 30 minutes to travel between the USA and Russia. leaving little time to defend, right? Now, each missile, you got 10,000, warheads, but each missile can have 10 or more MIRVs, which are multiple independent reentry vehicles, and many decoys. For example, the Soviet R-36M ICBM had 10 MIRVs and 40 decoys. I mean, so instead of 10,000 targets, you're looking at 50,000 targets, right? I mean, how are you going to shoot all these down, right? I mean, you let one get through, that's way too much damage. Missiles can be launched from unknown locations, for example, subs, stealth aircraft, right? You don't know where these subs are at, so they're difficult to track and target. Thusly, ABM systems could be overwhelmed by a first strike, making it difficult to guarantee that no nukes would get through to cause a nuclear holocaust. On the other hand, ABM systems used offensively in coordination with the first strike stand a far greater chance of being effective. I mean, you can't guarantee that completely too, but there's again probability. It's increased probability people will think it can be effective. The first strike would destroy the bulk of retaliatory strike capability, making it easier for ABMs to intercept the few remnant missiles that managed to survive. A first strike use of ABMs would hold the initiative. This is critical in military force. Any military person knows, that holding the initiative is far superior than being reactive. Expecting the retaliatory strike, allowing for careful intelligence gathering, targeting, and preparation. Thus, it will be more effective. Either way you look at it, ABMs are destabilizing because they decrease the deterrence from retaliatory strike survivability. All right. So the difficulties of defending 100% against a first strike shifted the emphasis from defense after shooting, right, to deterrence prior to shooting. Since deterrence is based upon survivability of retaliatory strike capability, this is your deterrence, that you can whack them back, and that's guaranteed, right? That's what deters them, which is reduced by ABMs. ABMs increase the risk of a first strike and are thus destabilizing. And this, in part, is the reasoning behind the ABM. There's more to it than this, right? But that's the major point there. So we'll get to more reasons for the ABM Treaty later. If survivability of a retaliatory strike increases, then that decreases the likelihood of a first strike. So if you can ensure that you can whack them back, well, no one's going to fire missiles at you in the first place because they're going to get whacked back, right? Thus, survivability of a retaliatory strike is stabilizing. However, if survivability of a retaliatory strike decreases, that increases the likelihood of a first strike, right? People think probability, we can get away with it, right? Scot-free here. All right, so we'll do it. Now, ABMs decrease the survivability of retaliatory strikes, therefore increase the likelihood of a first strike, and therefore ABMs are destabilizing. Now, this in part is the reasoning behind the ABM Treaty, but because human instinct for survival is both primal and powerful, many will find this logic hard to follow. However, I'm saying, you can't follow fear, right? Primal is primitive, simple, stupid, and unthinking, right? But I swear, fear-mongering works all the time. All you got to do is pump up fear, and that's going to dominate. Right? Proof of the importance of placed on survivability of retaliatory strike capability. All right, so I'm going to go through the many things done to increase survivability of retaliatory strike, and so that's increased SRS. And you see, anytime I have this is something that was done to increase your survivability of retaliatory strike capability. Right, all these things. Here, and there's one more here. Okay. So it shows you the emphasis they put upon making sure your retaliatory strike capability survived. All right. So now, to understand this, I want to give you some background information here. For retaliatory strike capability, time is of the essence because it takes time to 1. Detect incoming weapons, 2. Verify incoming weapons, which is important because you don't want to fire off yours when you're not sure that, absolutely certain that their weapons are coming in. Um, Otherwise, you're starting a first strike, and you're starting a nuclear holocaust. Prepare your weapons of fire, and then fire them. I mean, it takes time to prepare your weapons. You'll see. And the time it takes for incoming nuclear weapons to arrive is both short and varies. For example, ICBMs coming in from Russia here, all right, take about 30 minutes to hit the USA. So, 30 minutes or less, they're whacking the USA. That doesn't give you much time, 30 minutes. I mean, you got to detect them, and then you got to figure out whether that they're really coming, and then you got to try to get your, preparation, and you got to try to get your own missiles off. So ICBMs I said that. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs, can take far less time because subs can be hiding, roughly 40 miles off our coast, right? And that's far less than 30 minutes. I mean, that can be less than 5 minutes, all right? And the idea is this, right? Subs can go anywhere. And a lot of them used to, during the Cold War, they would hide under the polar ice cap and then burst through and then launch the missiles after they cracked through the ice, right? But they can be as close as 40 miles off our coast. I mean, that's close, right? And the reason being is because the continental shelf, which is only about 200 feet deep, that extends on average, about 40 miles off your coast. But it's beyond that, it drops off to 7,000 feet, right? That's good deep water where a submarine can hide, right? And that's close to your shore, right? Now, time for air-launched nuclear weapons can vary depending upon, one is stealth, right? Stealth aircraft can penetrate your airspace and release a nuclear weapon right over the target, leaving essentially zero reaction time. I mean, it's like before you know it, it's right over your head, and it's dropping on you. Right, so I believe that stealth aircraft are destabilizing because they increase first strike capability. Because of this fact, and you can fly these planes right over the target, and then there's no reaction time. Now another way of doing that was like during the Cold War, having bombers airborne 24/7 and very close to their targets. For example, between 1960 and 68, there was an operation called Chrome Dome, right, in which B-52s were in the air 24/7. Right, they had rotating shifts of B-52s, but around the clock for these 8-9 years, you had these planes in the air 24/7, right? Now, one is that shortens reaction time because these planes were flying over the North Pole area, close to Russia, not over Russian airspace, but pretty damn close. And also another thing is they're off the ground, they're ready to go, so they're not caught on the ground and vulnerable, and this increases survivability of retaliatory strike capability. So this is one of the ways. And then some of these air-launched missiles, have standoff range. For example, this AGM-129 is a cruise missile that's actually stealth cruise missile, right? And they're carried by these B-52s, and these can fly about 2,000 miles, right? So they have some standoff range, right? And then the speed of the weapons after they're released at standoff range. For example, cruise missiles are not very fast. These got, cruise missile travels about 500, 600 miles an hour, roughly, somewhere around there, right? So, in this case, if this missile is launched at its max standoff range, it's going to take 4 hours to get there, which is actually pretty slow, a pretty long time. Now, another weapons are these glide bombs, these B-61 thermonuclear bombs, right? They're hydrogen bombs. They just glide. They're slow, right? But the thing about it is they're carried by these stealth planes, right? Which can be right over the target when they drop it, leaving no reaction time, even though they're slow. And then there's hypersonic weapons, right? Which the Russians and the Chinese have developed, and U.S. is developing. We're kind of lagging behind, I guess, right? They developed them first, right? They travel at Mach 20. Well, this is the speed of an ICBM, but they're coming in at Mach 20, and they're also super maneuverable too, right? So they're, they can basically evade our our anti-ballistic missile systems. All right. So now, one of the first things that was done to ensure survivability of retaliatory strike capability was to have hardened underground silos to store your ICBMs, right? So a first strike can't take them out. So you have these hardened silos. Here's an ICBM, all this concrete and so forth around it. All the personnel who control launches, they're all protected from both blast and radiation, right? So a first strike comes in, bam, nuclear weapons. Well, it doesn't matter because these guys survive, all right? And your retaliatory strike survives. So another thing that was done was called silo venting, right? And it's because when ICBM goes off, there's so much heat and explosion from the blast that if you fire these in the silo, well, it blows up the missile itself. You destroy the missile. So what they would have to do is they'd have to lift the missile out of the silo, and that takes about 20-30 minutes. Well, you know what? Hell, these missiles come in about 30 minutes or less, right? So that could be too late, right? So what they developed was something called silo venting, where all the exhaust blast is vented out to the sides. And this is the Titan II, the first to have silo venting, right? You see the blast coming up to the sides, right? So you don't have to take that 20-30 minutes to lift them out of the silo. You just fire them off inside the silo, ready to go. All right. Another way of doing this is with cold launch missiles, all right? And it's launched out of the silo with compressed air, right? So in some cases, like this example here, you got a Peacekeeper missile, which is a huge missile, 10 warheads, 10 MIRVs here, and so big that you can't vent off all the exhaust gas. So instead what they would do is they would blast it out with a burst of compressed air, kind of like a pellet gun, right? Just shoot it out. Right, and then once it's in the air, clear of the silo, then you ignite the rocket, and all the heat and blast kind of blows out to the side. You're not going to destroy the missile, right? All right. So again, you eliminate that 20 to 30 minutes to lift a missile out of the silo, right? And that increases survivability of your retaliatory strike. Just blast it out right away. And then another thing, it has to do with fueling these missiles right before launch. So what they came up with was something called hypergolic liquid fuels that can be stored safely in the missile at ambient temperature, at atmospheric temperature. All right. Hypergolic is a fancy word that means you got two different liquids, both of which by themselves are stable and storable in these missiles long term. But when you mix them together, there's like a violent explosion, right? So you just splash them together, boom, you got a rocket blast. All right, now why this is important is because the older ones would have to be fueled right before they fire them. For example, if you ever seen like Apollo 13, right, or seen video clips of the Saturn V rocket, which carried the Apollo capsules there, it was taken up. You see these big blocks of chunks falling off. Well, when I was a kid, I was like, what the hell, man? Look at this stuff is breaking off, right? But it turns out, no, it's just ice, big sheets of ice. And the reason why is you had to fuel these rockets with cryogenic liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Reason being, you can't have like a gas bottle of hydrogen and liquid. You're not going to get enough gas, right? You got to compress it so much it turns into a liquid, right? Which are packed together in a liquid, right? Now, to do that, that takes high pressure. Well, to get a tank so it doesn't explode under that high pressure, right? It'll be too heavy. You're never going to get the sucker off the ground because the tank weighs too much. So what you do is to avoid that pressure, right? You freeze it down. You get it so cold, right? That it's a liquid at no pressure, at low pressure, right? Right, but now what happens is you got to do that right before you launch, because if you keep that inside that missile too long, it's going to heat up to ambient temperature, and then the pressure is going to go up and burst those tanks. So you got to wait till the last minute to load them, right? But that takes about 30 minutes, right? But then the enemy missiles can be coming in and destroying everything, right? So another thing that was done, they used corrosive liquids. So instead of these cryogenic liquids, well, they had corrosive liquids. But the problem is, if you can't leave them in the tanks, right? Because they would just eat through the tanks if you left them there too long. So you'd have to fill these right before launch also, right? And again, 30 minutes, right? Now, Titan II was a game changer in a number of ways because it was the first one to get these hypergolic, stable fuels that are kept in there all the time. But another way of doing it is to use these solid rocket fuels, which are highly stable, low maintenance, and immediate launch. So you can keep them in there. I mean, it's like a bottle rocket or like an Estes model rocket, right? Solid fuel, just light it off, it goes. And that's what the first missiles to have that were called Minutemen. I guess that's from the Revolutionary War Minutemen, but it means that you can fire these off in a minute, basically, right? You had Minuteman 1, 2, and 3, and then the Peacekeeper, the big Peacekeeper missile had solid fuel too, right? So just stored safely, got to launch, just let it off. Now another thing that was done to increase survivability of retaliatory strike capability was to have each missile have its own self-contained guidance system, which eliminated dependence upon a central ground-based guidance system. So early missiles, you fire off all these missiles. All the missiles are guided by a central ground-based system. Well, I mean, if you're the enemy, all you got to do is target that central ground-based system. Once that's taken out, right? All the missiles dependent upon are ineffective. And this allows for wide dispersion of missiles and complicates targeting, right? Instead of targeting one central ground-based system, you got to target all the missiles. All right. Now another thing that was done to increase survivability of retaliatory strike is to put ballistic missiles or cruise missiles onto submarines, right? Now the reason why is submarines are extremely hard to track, especially U.S. U.S. is harder than Russians. Russians have tended to be kind of noisy subs because the missile subs cannot be targeted. The retaliatory strike cannot be eliminated. Right? I mean, you don't know where these subs are at. And again, during the Cold War, they would hide under the North Pole ice, right? But they can be anywhere. Right? You don't know where they can be close. And so there's two classes of submarines that we use. These are ballistic missile submarines where they have vertical launch tubes that shoot out these ICBMs with compressed air, and you shoot them out from underwater. And when they break the surface, that's when you ignite the rocket, right? Kind of like the Peacekeeper, when it bursts out of its silo, that's when you ignite the rocket. Well, it's the same thing here. Or any attack submarine, which does not have the ballistic missile vertical launch tubes, but just regular torpedo tubes. Well, you can launch these cruise missiles out of torpedo tubes. They're roughly the same, size and shape, and they can carry a nuclear warhead. All right, so we have 18 ballistic missile subs, and we have 50 attack subs here. All right. Now, another thing that was done by the Soviets was this dead hand computer launched retaliatory strike thing here, and it was due to the USA having intermediate range nuclear weapons stationed in Europe right on the Soviets' doorstep, leaving them only about 10 minutes response time. So they figured this. They're like, man, 10 they're here in 10 minutes. We're all dead, right? Well, we can't react to that in 10 minutes. So they developed, as a retaliatory strike capability, a computer app. So everyone dies, but the computer survives, and the computer launches a retaliatory strike after they're all dead. Right? That's called dead hand. Right? I mean, for the Soviets, this 10 minutes is scary, but for us, man, you're putting our lives in the hands of a computer, right? And it kind of reminds me of that movie, 1983 movie called War Games, where a computer kind of takes control. A brand new computer that controls launch of missiles takes over and is going to start a nuclear war, right? You're right. I mean, this is just a movie, right? But I mean, that's what they're kind of fearing here. And so they came out with this treaty here, ABM Treaty, eliminating all ground-launched missiles with a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers, right? Whatever that is, like, I don't know, 300 to 3,000 miles or something, roughly around there. So here's an interim review. I'm going to go far more. Here's the bulk of the lecture. That's going to be tomorrow. Right. This is just background information so you can understand this. All right. Interim review. The impossibility of preventing unimaginable damage from a nuclear first strike placed a premium on deterrence. Right. You're not going to block it, so you better prevent it in the first place. Deterrence theory, or mutually assured destruction, holds that increasing the probability of a successful retaliatory strike decreases the probability of a first strike. In other words, no one would strike first if they would assuredly be destroyed in return. I mean, you're not benefiting from this if you get totally destroyed. Because of this, methods of assuring the survivability of retaliatory strike capability reduces the risk of first strike and are thus stabilizing, right? If you can assure that your retaliatory strike survives. Methods of blocking retaliatory strike, like ABM systems, increases the risk of a first strike and are thus destabilizing. Historically, ABM systems have proven to increase threat risk by motivating the development of multiple independent reentry vehicles to oversaturate ABM capability with both multiple warheads and decoys, and MIRVs accelerated the arms race, so that was destabilizing. And two ABM systems today have motivated hypersonic super maneuverability reentry vehicles, which the Russians have developed, and Chinese. Thus, ABMs cause escalation of nuclear threat, which leads to counter-escalation, accelerating the arms race. And we'll see this. I'll explain this tomorrow in some real examples here. But here's some examples. Here's an ABM missile. I believe this is called a Nike Zeus. I thought it was Hercules for some reason. When I was a kid, I was really into all this stuff, and I memorized there's Nike Hercules and Nike Ajax, and anyway, so this is a missile that was deployed in 1958, right? Well, they're like, oh, okay, we got to counter this. So they developed MIRVs, right? So each missile, instead of having one warhead, each missile has 10. So the missile fired, and then these break out at a certain point, right? And then you got 10 of these suckers to deal with, right? And they're all targeting different targets independently. Well, example is the Soviet R-36M intercontinental ballistic missile, which had 10 warheads. Like, this is the Peacekeeper with 10 warheads, right? They had 10 warheads, but they had 40 decoys. So instead of 10,000 targets, you got to worry about. You're going to try to hit 50,000 targets. I mean, come on. That's going to saturate an ABM system. All right, so now we're deploying these ABM systems in Poland and Romania. Again, the one in Poland is not quite ready, but the one in Romania has been operational since 2016, right? So the Russians accelerate the development and deployment of these hypersonic, hyper maneuverability weapons here. All right. So these travel at Mach 20. All right. 20 times the speed of sound. 15,000 miles per hour. The speed of an ICBM. Right. They're coming in fast. Right. And it's got large fins. At that speed, these large fins make this thing hyper maneuverable. Right. So it can evade these ABM. ABMs can't hit it. So we develop ABMs. Well, they come up with something that you can't hit it with an ABM. Right. And then now we're going to develop something that can shoot down hyper velocity, hyper maneuverability, right? So you see, it's counter escalation, escalation, counter escalation, escalation, right? All right. So the ABM Treaty, which lasted between '72 and 2002, when the Bush administration abrogated it, right? Said, we're not going to do this anymore. Right. The destabilizing threat elevating effect of ABM systems was the reasoning behind the anti-ballistic missile treaty signed by Nixon and Brezhnev in 1972, which allowed for 2 ABM batteries with 100 missiles each for the U.S. and USSR. Then 2 years later, they had the 1974 protocol, which cut that in half. So it reduced it to 1 battery each, right? You can install 1 battery each, right? So the U.S. installed its system at the North Dakota Safeguard Complex, and the Soviets installed theirs to protect Moscow. So here we installed ours way up here. What do you got up here? What's that line from Steers and Queer? I'm just kidding. Yeah. What's up in North Dakota, right? Maybe got some grassland for cattle, right? And you got missile silos, right? You got the missiles. So these are defending the missiles, and Moscow's defending their political elites or whatever. I don't know. So what was the USA protecting? Retaliatory strike capability. We're protecting our missiles, right? More proof of the importance of survivability of retaliatory strike. Missiles are more important than Washington, D.C., right? Okay, so all these are cases. I'm showing you all the things, all the wide array of things that were done to enhance survivability of retaliatory strike, to ensure mutually assured destruction, which is our means of deterrence and stability, right? Which ABM systems undermine. Okay, that's that for that lecture. Again, that's background for the main lecture here. In this lecture, I'm going to show you basically the bullshit reasons why we abrogated the ABM Treaty. And I'll show you how ridiculous bullshit they are. All right.